public speaking class, as we talked about last time, public speaking is a big deal, especially in a Western culture. So in the educational system within the US, there's no way you're going to get away from this. You're going to have to learn to present something, speak somewhere publicly in front of someone somewhere. So usually, a lot of times classes have presentations of all sorts that you'll have to give from time to time. So that presents a challenge for people. If you don't have experience speaking, if you're not used to it, you can get really flustered, you can get really frustrated about it because it's not always easy and natural for everyone. Some people are naturally good speakers. Some people just naturally can do it better than others, just like singing. Some people sing good, right? Naturally. It's just the gift they have. Other people dance good. Now somebody else needs a lot of practice. Right? They need to be taught. Just like that with public speaking. For some people it comes more natural, for other people not so much. So, but it is a skill that anyone can learn, and that's the good news. Okay, so in our second chapter we're getting into, it's called Getting Started, and that's really what we're going to talk today about is how do you start preparing for a speech? What do you work through? What are some of the things that you have to work out before you even begin? Well, the obvious question that we have to answer right from the beginning is you have to know your topic. What are you going to be talking about? You have to choose a topic. Let's say you have a freedom to give a speech on any topic you want. I don't give you that freedom in this class. I kind of assign topics to you because people really agonize over freedom. But let's say if I gave you a free topic. Actually, your last speech is going to be more or less free, but your free topic. What would you speak about? And how would you even choose a topic? What would your process be? If I say, you know what, I want you to give 8-minute speech on whatever topic you want, where would you go with that? Any topics that come to mind? And if they do, why? Why would you speak about that? What are the types of thoughts that are going to be running through your head as you're preparing for your speech? What would you need to know? What would you want to know? What kind of questions you would have to answer? If I'm just saying, hey, you got 8 minutes, come up with a topic. Well, first, you're going to have to ask me, who's listening, right? Who's going to be listening to my topic? Will they even care to listen to what I'm talking about? I mean, you do want to make a speech, and if you're going to make a speech, it must be an effective speech, right? Hopefully, you're not just speaking to get the air out, right? You're speaking to make an impact. So if you're going to make an impact, then your audience is a big deal. You have to say, all right, I'm going to speak about healthcare. Okay? Who's interested in healthcare? Anybody interested in healthcare? Nobody really cares about healthcare. Why? Because it's a huge topic, right? What if I tell you I'm going to speak about healthcare insurance that is affordable or something like that? Okay, now you're a little bit more interested, right? Or how about if I say healthcare choices available for students? Mm-hmm. Now you're even more interested, right? So you see, when I just pick a topic, I pick a topic randomly. It may be interesting, may not be interesting to you, but I have to think, who am I speaking to? And that determines partially my choices. That guides me. So once you figure out what it is that you're going to be speaking about, you're working on your subject, you can't just pick a broad, huge subject like healthcare. Or I'm going to give a speech about money. Okay? What kind of money? Are you going to talk about paper money? Are you going to talk about coins? Are you going to talk about American money? You're going to talk about foreign money? You're going to talk about e-currency? When I say money, that's just so much, right? So I have to narrow it down. But if I'm going to say, I'm going to address you about Bitcoin, or how Bitcoin, versus the paper money or something like that, and or foreign currency exchange rates or something like that, whatever. I have to specify. The more my speech is narrowed down, the easier it is for you to even understand what in the world I'm going to be talking about. Because if I say money, I could be talking about retirement, I could be talking about investment, I could be talking about stocks, I could be talking about going opening a bank account. The topic is so huge. So what we call this is you have to narrow it down. Narrow it down. Now, so let's say you do choose a topic. How do you narrow it down? Again, you take into consideration who's listening, what do they know about the topic that I'm talking about. So if I'm going to talk about savings accounts, how much do you guys know about savings accounts? Do you know much about savings accounts? Do you know what savings accounts do? Okay, so that much you do know. They save money. So if I'm going to talk to you about savings account, now that I know that you don't know much about it, I'm going to start with the basics. But if I was talking to somebody who knows a lot about savings accounts, I'm going to go into the specifics. So, for example, I can say, all right, my speech is about popular savings account choices available to you today and how much money you can actually make by making a wise choice. If that's what I want to talk about, I have to obviously condense my speech topic a little bit, make it a little bit better, right? But that's what I want to talk about, right? And so what would you expect I would say in that topic? You would expect that I would probably talk about different types of savings accounts, maybe different banks, right? You would explain, I would hopefully explain to you how interest works in a savings account. How do you make money in a savings account? We all know how banks make money because you're basically giving them a loan. You're putting your money into it and letting them use it, letting them invest it. But how do you make money? So I can explain that, and explain the different choices out there, and I could probably, if I was given a speech and I only had 5 minutes, let's say, I would probably pick 3 different banks and work with 3 different types of banks and say, okay, this is what you can have, this, and this, and give you a little bit of a comparison, and then all of a sudden you're like, okay, now I understand more about savings accounts, and I can make a decision. But you see, what I'm doing is when I'm speaking to you about savings account, I am defining my purpose. What is the purpose of my speech? Do I speak about savings account so you go and open one? Or do I speak about savings account just because I want you to be knowledgeable about it? Am I speaking about savings account because I don't want you to make a bad mistake of opening a wrong one, or investing into a wrong place, a wrong bank, or I simply want you to make a better choice? The question is, what is the purpose of my speech? What is the purpose of my speech? And there are several different purposes in speaking. There are what we call general purposes and specific purposes. What are the general purposes of speech? Do you know what they are? What are they?
Basically, with the bank account, the saving account is just kind of basic.
Right. Let's forget my example. My example, it doesn't matter what speech I'm making on what topic. Forget my topic.
Okay.
Let's just say the purpose of my speech. There are common purposes for which I would get up and speak to you. Okay? The textbook gives us 3 purposes. Anybody remembers?
Yeah. The first one is to inform.
To inform, exactly.
And the second is to persuade.
To persuade, exactly.
And the last one is to entertain.
Entertain, excellent. Fantastic. To inform, to persuade, entertain. That means pretty much all my speeches would fall into that category, right? So if I'm giving you a speech on the bank, I can make it persuasive, where I basically say, okay, what bank are you with? You're going to tell me the bank you're with. You have a savings account? You're going to say, yeah, I have a savings account. And I'm going to say, you know what? Let's pull up the rates for that bank. And I'm going to pull up the rates for that bank. And I'm going to pull up rates for another bank. And I say, hey, if you put $100 into this account, at the end of the year, this is how much you're going to get. To put $100 in that account, this is how much you're going to get in the year. Which one do you think is a better savings account? What do you think is going to happen in the end of that speech? I would have persuaded you to switch. I would have persuaded you, even if you don't switch, I would have persuaded you that the account that you have is not so great. Assuming that the one that I am showing you is better, right? Maybe it won't be better, but what if it is? So the idea is that I can choose to persuade you in my speech, because my purpose becomes for you to change your mind or to form an opinion that is different from the one that you're holding right now. Okay, that's persuasion. Informing is what you hear all the time. So in this class, every time I speak to inform. I don't need to persuade you because, well, you signed up for this class. You've already persuaded. Now, I need to inform you, and that means I need to help you understand the content of this class better, right? And that is my general speaking purpose in this class every single time. Now, occasionally, I do persuade you of how important public speaking is. But most of the time, I'm just informing you of new concepts or idea, or I'm clarifying them. I'm helping you understand. Much of this you already know. And so my job is to make it clear, better, easier to understand, okay? So, and then the third purpose is to entertain. Can you give me an example of speech to entertain? What would be a good example of a speech to entertain? Where do you encounter that speech? If informative speeches you see in classroom every single day, every time you turn on TV, you see a commercial, guess what they're trying to do? They're trying to persuade you to buy that product or something like that, right? So you see persuasive speeches all the time. Billboard, every billboard is a persuasive speech, essentially. It's just not speaking to you, but it is communicating to you persuasively. So in that sense, TV is better because they're actually talking to you. But what would be an example of a speech to entertain? Just off the top of your head. What do you think? What is the most common speech to entertain that you can possibly imagine? You don't know. Okay, he's been honest with that. Okay, if I read my kid a bedtime story, it's not necessarily about learning, right? It could be learning. It could be teaching them morals and good things, right? But most of the time it's just to entertain and help them go to sleep, right? Help them to relax, wind down, right? Okay, you go to a comedy show. You watch a stand-up comedy, and a comic makes all these jokes. Are you learning something from what he's saying, actually, or she's saying? No. Is that information in any way useful to you at all for your life? Probably not. You're just being entertained. It's just, you're there for fun. You're receiving information, but it is just for pleasure. It doesn't serve a purpose of making a decision or learning, or no action is being asked, in comedy and things like that, except just laugh and applaud, and that's about it, right? So you see, these are speeches to entertain. Now, guess what? We are not going to be focusing on speeches to entertain in this class. Why? Because it's probably the least useful speech to you, at least in the academic environment. In the business world, you're not going to need speeches to entertain unless you're actually a professional entertainer. Then it'll be a different story, and you need to go to a different class. Okay, you need to go to acting class. But most of the time, you and I are going to be using these two types of speeches, to inform or to persuade. And we actually do. We already do in our life all the time. Now, are we clear on what the difference between speeches to inform and speeches to persuade is? Is that clear, the difference between them, the purposes? They're very different purposes. Because sometimes we get confused, like, what am I doing? What is the purpose of my speech? We get lost sometimes. Am I just telling people information, or I'm actually trying to get them to change their mind? That's where people get lost sometimes. Sometimes we simply tell people information, and that's it. It's good to know kind of stuff. Or another times we actually want them to do something. And that really comes down to more of a specific purpose. See, behind a general purpose, and those are two general purposes, to inform, to entertain, there's also a very specific purpose. And the specific purposes could be an action that I want you to take, for example, or something like that. So I'm going to back up just for a second. Forgot to say something important about speeches to persuade. By the way, in your opinion, if I was to ask you just your personal opinion, there's no right or wrong, I'm asking your opinion. What do you think is harder, a speech to inform or a speech to entertain? I mean, a speech to persuade, I'm sorry.
Speech to persuade.
Speech to persuade. Do you think speech to persuade is harder? Why is it harder?
Because it is aiming for the listener to change their mind and do certain actions.
Yes, yes. So the reason why persuasion is harder is because I have to change as a listener. That means you have to work hard for me to change my beliefs, essentially. You're working on a different area of my mind. Because what I think or what I know is one area, but what I believe is a different area. We all have beliefs. We all have values. and I can appeal to a particular belief or value in your life, and that will make you change your mind, because my appeal is consistent with the value that you happen to hold. Okay? Let's say you value education, right? And I make a speech and I hit that value, and you say, well, you got me. I do believe that education is really important, so you know what? I'm going to get off my behind and I'm going to go and I'm going to get an education. I'm not going to sit and just do nothing. Why? Because I already hit a value that you believe. But what if you don't believe in education? Now it's even harder for me to make you understand how important it is and convince you to embrace that idea. But I still have to find some sort of a common ground and reason with you. And that's why it's harder. So you're absolutely right. Speeches to persuade are much, much harder, which is why we're going to do them actually later. We're going to start with inform and then move on to persuade. All right. So moving to a specific purpose, and if you guys are tracking with me, I'm kind of slowly walking you through pages 18 and 19 now. There are different types of purposes, as the authors say here. There's short-term, there's long-term purposes. There is usually a single specific purpose. Okay, this is very important. A single specific purpose. You can't ask audience to do too much. If you have listeners listening to you and you're going to ask them to do something, you cannot try to combine too much into one speech, because they won't do it. It's just how our minds work. We get on the track and that's it. So what are some of the specific purposes? The textbook gives us really good examples, so I'm just going to use what they're talking about here. Basically, your specific purpose is the one that you can articulate for an audience that focuses you on precisely what you want your audience to understand, believe, or do. Understand, believe, or do. Those are your specific purposes. It's not that I just simply want to inform you about something. There's something that I truly need to get through. So, of course, one purpose is understanding. Okay? If I'm going to explain the difference between different types of savings accounts, then I simply want you to be informed. But I'm not necessarily asking you to make a decision. Okay? Maybe if I want to affect your beliefs, I will need to motivate you to embrace the idea of saving money into a savings account. And the way I would have to do that is I would have to persuade you that it was worthwhile. And this way I will actually be able to affect your beliefs. So that could be a secondary purpose of my speech. So my primary purpose, my main purpose, my main goal is to persuade. My specific goal is to persuade you to save money. Okay? So it's not just I just want you to persuade. I don't just want you to be persuaded that a savings account is a good idea. I want you to be persuaded that this is something really, really important and you need to do it. And now, so you're coming closer to that idea. Or I can go for another level, which is even harder to reach, is you can understand. Understanding is easy to reach. You're just informing people. When you try to change their beliefs, something that they haven't done or don't do normally, but you're asking them to do that or to consider doing that, you're asking them to step out. Okay? And the hardest part is to cause a person to action, is to actually get them to do it. It's like saying, all right, here, I have a banker right here with me. He's going to walk in through the door, and we're going to set up your savings account right now. And let's transfer $100 from your checking to your savings, because that will be the beginning of your savings fund. And see, to get you to commit to do that is going to be the hardest step for me to do. That may take the most work. And as a speaker, I actually have to gauge my audience, and I have to understand, how far can I take you? Can I take you all the way from not even believing in opening a savings account to actually opening it and putting money into it? Maybe not in one speech. It may take more than that. It may take first to be informed, then you'll start to understand, oh, I really need to do this, and then I come along and I finally say, okay, let's do it. And then you go for it. So you have to realize sometimes you can only move people so far in speech. If you're speaking to persuade, especially. To inform, again, it's easy. All you want them is to understand what information you have for them and how it's valuable to them. That's it. But to actually get people to commit to do an action, it takes a little bit more work. And that's really where the hard part of persuasion comes in the speeches to persuade. Now, hopefully you guys understand the difference between your general purpose and your specific purpose.